I think it's also important at this point, Sean, to point out that there is this sort of disparity between the biotechnology aspect that we're talking about and as in the technology itself, and this corruption of business, because biotechnology itself, in my opinion, may not necessarily be a bad thing, but the main problem is when Monsanto comes in, being the corrupt entity it is, and having these, like you said, incestuous relationships with government. So I think that's really the problem. But even beyond that as well, another just crazy aspect of this corruption is Monsanto in 2014, I believe, maybe 2013, was given judicial immunity by President Obama. It was called the Farmers Assurance Provision, otherwise known as the Monsanto Protection Act. And this essentially gave Monsanto judicial immunity. Sean, as individuals, you and I aren't given, immunity from any crime we may commit. That's just simply not the case. It's ridiculous to think that, but somehow these corporations like Monsanto are being given this right that no individual can possess. If we, say, rob a bank, then, we're responsible for that. But if Monsanto's poisoning people with these untested crops that they claim are safe, even though there's been no scientific consensus, then that's somehow okay. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, that's the whole point, is whether or not they're actually poisoning us with the crops, because aside from actually altering the crops and their DNA, right, their genetics, as we're now understanding more and more, because you are what you eat actually is becoming more and more scientifically proven, right? It does seem that the alteration of the DNA, let's say, of a crop that gets fed to the human, or perhaps to the cow or pig or whatever animal you eat and you're ingesting, also may affect our DNA.
Right, and I think, personally, that's one of the reasons why I'm a vegetarian. I, don't really trust all these artificial growth hormones they're injecting in cows and all these other animals. For example, they're feeding cows now corn, which they're not intended to digest. And this corn crop, for example, is, with the genetic modification they've done, it has pesticides in it. It produces its own pesticides. And it's just, in my opinion, not healthy to eat. Like you said, we are what we eat. And personally, I don't want to be ingesting this, toxic stuff that's also banned in other countries, like we said, Europe, for example. So why do Europeans get to have access to better food when here in America it seems like, whatever you put in front of us, we'll eat? And it's funny, too, being educated on this issue, I try to inform other people of it, but going to family parties or stuff like that, you don't eat something and people look at you like you're some alien or something, when you simply don't want to ingest this toxic stuff. But I find that really crazy that people just, again, like I said at the beginning, they don't really care what's in their food, and they'd rather be taken advantage of by corporations because something tastes good.
Right. Well, and we have this, it's very clear there's an obesity problem, for example, in America that you don't see in Europe, and it's amazing to notice that, Italians and French people and others, they eat a lot of breads, for example, in their diet, and the wheat content, I would have to assume, is so different that we don't get the inflammation, this bloating response, because you really look at most Americans and the bloating looks almost like an inflammation, right? So have there been any correlations yet found between the issue of genetic modification of the wheat crop, or any kind of basically any kind of tampering that's taking place to the food that's creating any kind of correlation with our obesity problem here?
Well, the way I look at it, Sean, recently I saw a video online, I'm sure you saw it too. It was an interview between one journalist and someone affiliated with Monsanto, I believe, and the representative from Monsanto said, Roundup is safe to drink. If you want to drink it, go ahead. It's perfectly safe to consume. And the journalist said, well, if it's so safe, we have some in the back room. Do you want to try it? And the representative from Monsanto got all up in arms and got all angry and left the interview. So my way of looking at it is, if we put in our salad, tomatoes, for example, one of the top genetically modified crops, and if we're ingesting that, in which there's pesticide being produced inside the tomato, that's not something I want to eat. And does it cause inflammation? I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think it's safe to eat something that is toxic to insects, and doing so just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. So in terms of, the notion of, again, a lot of this has to go with the notion of pesticides and herbicides, pesticides that are being sprayed onto the crops, right? How much of that is just presentational, right? Because people oftentimes will notice that maybe an organic crop may not look as pristine and glossy and right, and almost manufactured in a sense, but that obviously is what is more natural as a result, is that it doesn't have that pristine look to it. So how much are these pesticides and herbicides actually necessary for the crop to not get destroyed?
Well, that's a tricky question, but if we look back, really, there were no pesticides. The only pesticides there were organic. For example, on grapes used to produce wine. I was interviewing someone for the documentary again, and he said that they used to use, a long time ago, they used to use spiders as a repellent to pests, for example. And, there are these other natural ways to sort of hedge ourselves against pests invading crops without having to use these toxic chemicals that, again, aren't proven to be safe. So personally, I'd rather side with nature and how things are meant to be instead of these man-made, again, toxic chemicals, really.
Right. And again, that has to go with this whole collusion aspect or conflict of interest, where Monsanto is selling the Roundup, which is the pesticide, right? And then basically selling also at the same time the specialized seed that's resistant, or would be it's resistant to the herbs and the pests that would be attacking it. So it almost goes hand in hand. So it's almost like they want to sell you both angles to protect your crop, which really, they're not going to profit if you go to more organic or natural systems of production. But given the massive growth of the agribusiness, what's called which is it's basically corporate megalithic agribusiness now, that's become gigantuan compared to what you used to have in terms of the small farmers. I mean, it's very much a reflection, I think, of our overall corporate takeover of America, right? Where we used to have the smaller middle-class businesses, mom-and-pop businesses. All those, were reflections very much of the fact that we had small farmers and mid-sized, farm ranges that have all been gobbled up by the massive agribusiness, by the massive corporate business that are ultimately incestuous. And I think you see it with things, for example, like Monsanto being partly owned by Bill Gates. No, isn't he a tremendous either investor or co-owner in Monsanto?
Yeah, to my knowledge. So
again, we're talking about this sort of this megalith that's taking over, and as a result, I think it feels like the quality is sort of deteriorating because you don't have that relationship of this, of the person to the crop, of the farmer to the land, or to the farmer to the animal, and as a result, you're just getting this kind of this massive business. They justify under the terms of, well, we can produce more at a cheaper cost, but then what is the cost? That's the benefit side of it, but what is the negative reaction would then seem to be the health consequences of this mass production.
Yeah, I'm glad you point that out, Sean. It does seem like there's been this deterioration of small businesses being replaced by these large corporations, obviously the corporatocracy as it's called. And, I find that really representative of how we're now looking at convenience over supporting, like you said, local businesses and, seeing people face to face. Instead, we can, buy stuff in bulk. And again, it's all under the name of convenience. And it's similar to the internet too, which is, a double-edged sword, of course. It provides us, communication to these, people from around the world who we can, communicate with and connect with. That's how probably, most people receive food even. But it seems like by doing so, again, there's been this deterioration of small businesses. And also something else I want to point out is that Monsanto actually has spent millions of dollars on anti-labeling measures, which is pretty funny because you think with all this investment, these millions of dollars they've funneled into genetic research and development with these patents they've secured, you think that they'd be, proud to label their products as genetically modified because seemingly it's so beneficial to the world, but instead they not only don't want these products being labeled, but they want to make it illegal to do so. A senator, I believe, from Kansas a while ago was trying to support them as well by making it illegal nationwide to label ingredients as, or label food products as genetically modified, which I find, again, so absurd that Monsanto is seemingly so proud, yet they don't want to label these products.
Right. Well, you also had trouble getting interviews, no, for your documentary?
Yeah, that was one of the most difficult aspects, actually, of creating the documentary. So many of these people, I'd email them, such as, doctors, health food specialists, politicians especially, and I'd say, hey, I'm a student making a documentary for C-SPAN, which hopefully would help, being that C-SPAN's supposed to be, fair and not biased, but I'd email them, and most of them, if they did respond, would actually agree to do it, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, this is a very important issue." But then, as the time came, they'd actually back out and cancel just for whatever reason. For example, one doctor I was emailing and exchanging with, he said initially he was like, "Oh yeah, this is a really important issue. I'd love to talk about it on camera," and then probably I think it was like a day beforehand, he actually sent me back an email, and he said, curiously enough, I'm not qualified to talk on this issue. So whether that was him not wanting to, talk about Monsanto on camera and he feared that, or if it was because he was being controlled by his company, who knows? But it was really eye-opening as well.
Mm-hmm. So as a result of that documentary, I mean, you've launched now this Teen Take YouTube channel, right? Mm-hmm. Describe a little bit what you're doing with it and what kind of interviews or what's the objective.
Well, Teen Take, I started it in December of 2013, and really it was sort of just intended to be my time capsule, if you will, because going back, I used to love to look through old family videos and everything and just see how I evolved as a person. So Teen Take was initially just supposed to be a time capsule of me sort of having a platform to discuss my opinions, not necessarily restricted to politics, but just in general. And then it sort of grew a little bit, not that it's some, large platform now, but it's been growing over time. And I used to do videos where I just sort of talk to the camera for like 7 minutes. I'd write out this long script, but I recently figured that's not the best way to engage people. So now I've been sort of alternating between interviews that I do and then recap videos on news stories. So the interviews are really my favorite to do. I recently interviewed Cindy Sheehan, an anti-war activist who I'm sure many are familiar with. I'll be next week interviewing Vani Hari, otherwise known as the Food Babe, who's a crusader for food transparency. And then I really have a diversity of guests because then after that as well, I'll be interviewing Shirley Phelps Roper, who is the daughter of the pastor of the Westboro Baptist Church. So that's basically what Teen Take is, and I just hope to keep expanding it. In 2016, the RNC is coming to Cleveland, so that should promise a lot of great content.
So I'm just curious, how much response do you feel like you're getting from within the young intelligentsia, let's call it, but young people who are actually engaged in a political sense, who are intelligent, who are concerned about their country or their future as a society? Do you see a response from young people? I mean, what is the feeling like? Because I remember in high school, you had a few people who were engaged, but it was a handful, and then for the most part, people are kind of caught up in their own worlds and sports and athletics and schoolwork. So do you feel like there's more of an awareness amongst young people now because of the internet, because of just in a sense, whatever, maybe the accessibility, I think, of knowledge and information being so close? Is there more activism?
Well, Sean, why would anyone possibly watch a teenager on the internet when you could look at Kim Kardashian or Justin Bieber watch sports all day? I mean, it's just, you can't make the comparison. But
hard to compete.
In all seriousness, I have seen some response from the youth demographic, but I'd say the majority of my audience is adults. But I think it's so necessary to get this teen perspective because, but then again, in school, some people, just because I have a YouTube channel, whether or not they're actively engaged in what I'm talking about, a lot of people at school, for example, do actually watch my videos. And if I could, maybe just plant the seeds, if you will, I think that's really critical. But again, recently with trying to talk about news stories, usually the news story recaps I do, and I have some commentary in there too, are like 1 to 2 minutes. So I try to keep things as engaging as possible. I integrate a lot of pop culture references and stuff like that to ultimately engage the youth. But again, overwhelmingly, the audience is adults. But again, with the internet as well, like you said, for me personally, that's been a stunning factor in everything that I do. And it's allowed me to really have this voice that I wouldn't have otherwise had, because personally, I'm shy, I'm introverted, and I wouldn't be, doing the things that I do if that were the case. But with the internet, it's again a double-edged sword, but at the same time it's given me this platform. It's enabled me to confront people like Nancy Pelosi, be in the presence of President Barack Obama. So in that sense, the internet's been incredibly influential in this communicating of political ideas.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing you were shy because you probably hit the books as a result, and that makes you much more informed.
Yes.
So are there any last points that you want to make as far as the GMOs are concerned, or what people really should be thinking about, or how can they inform themselves?
I just say that your best bet is to, if possible, grow your own food, shop locally, go to farmers markets, for example. Even if, these people beings and they simply want to make a profit, which again is, sort of the goal of all business. But advice